Diets based on very low carbohydrate intake have been popular in this country for more than 100 years. In fact, when I first got involved in bodybuilding back in the 1970s, that was the fashionable diet. The zero-carb diet was what everybody was on at the time. Now, why do people like this diet? Well, it works this way. When you eat carbohydrate, it becomes stored in the muscles as glycogen. And along with the glycogen, you also store water. Well, glycogen and water have a certain amount of weight to them, so this contributes to the body's overall weight. When you deprive the body of carbohydrate, you lose this glycogen, and you lose the water associated with it. So in the first few days of a carbohydrate deprivation diet, you lose a substantial amount of body weight. Your limbs get smaller. You seem to look more slender. As a matter of fact, one of the byproducts of this diet is also that you tend to lose your appetite, so it makes it somewhat easier to stay on the diet. But of course, you haven't lost any fat at all. You're simply dehydrated. However, there's another mechanism that comes into play when you deprive yourself too much of carbohydrates. You go into a state called ketosis. The state of ketosis is not only not very good for you, but it really doesn't help you to lose weight at all.
The human body needs a minimum of about 60 grams of carbohydrate every day. When glycogen is not available, the body has to go to an alternate emergency system in order to keep the brain and nervous system functioning. Fortunately, there is an alternate fuel source available, and that energy is produced when the body is in the state of ketosis. The body needs carbs in order to adequately burn fat. Without those carbs available, fat is incompletely burned, creating ketone bodies as a result, and the body begins more and more to metabolize amino acids, protein, in order to obtain energy. It does not, as is commonly assumed, speed up the metabolism of fat. Without sufficient carbs available, it simply isn't capable of doing this. Your appetite does tend to diminish when you're in a state of ketosis, but that's about the only real benefit. Since you can't burn fat efficiently without enough carbohydrate in your diet, this approach doesn't make for a very effective fat loss diet. And you begin to burn up your own lean body tissue at an increasing rate, which not only means you're cannibalizing your own muscles, but other protein structures as well. Heart muscle, to use one scary example.
You also end up with severely reduced energy for your workouts. The body will function on ketone bodies, but it doesn't function nearly as well as it does when it has carbohydrate energy available. Not only that, but your entire nervous system tends to shut down. You get irritable, you experience sleeplessness. In fact, you can get downright stupid. Your mind just doesn't work very well when all it has to fuel it is ketone bodies. So it's obvious that the ketosis diet is not a good one. You lose water and not fat. And then you put yourself in a situation in which it's easy for you to lose muscle, but difficult for you to lose fat. That's not a good idea for anyone. But for a bodybuilder who's trying to build maximum amount of muscle mass, it's simply a disaster.
However, as we've seen, the only way to lose fat while maintaining maximum muscle mass is by reducing your intake of carbohydrate. Therefore, it follows that knowing exactly how low you can go in dropping your carbs as part of a fat reduction diet is a very important element to achieving your goals. So how do you know how far you can go without going into carbohydrate deprivation? Actually, this is easy. There's a test that will tell you, and anyone can do it at home. You can buy a product called keto sticks in almost any drugstore. These are test strips that you dip in your urine and which turn from pink to deep purple when ketone bodies are detected. Ketosis dieters use these test sticks to make sure they're in ketosis. But with the Weider system diet, you should use these test strips to make sure you aren't in ketosis. And if you aren't in ketosis, you haven't overly restricted your carbohydrate intake. The rule is this. You can cut back on your carbohydrate as far as you want, as long as you don't go into ketosis. If you do go into ketosis, even just a little bit, you have to immediately increase your carbohydrate intake in order to give your body the carbs it needs to supply energy for exercise and to allow you to burn fat efficiently. Ketosis is the bottom line. You can't restrict your diet any further than this and expect to burn fat well and protect your lean body mass, which are two major goals of the bodybuilding diet. If this isn't enough, if you need to lose weight faster than this diet will allow you to, further restriction of your diet isn't the answer. You have to attack the problem from the other end by burning up more calories through exercise.
Carbohydrate deprivation is a mistake. Without carbohydrates, you have no energy for training. Carbohydrates are also muscle sparing, and without carbohydrates, you won't burn fat properly.
The biggest problem is when you train and when you're preparing for competition to train and everything, if you don't eat carbohydrate and you go really on low carbohydrate, the body tries to make protein, converting it into energy, and it's something that's very hard to do. Protein doesn't give energy. The body has to convert it, or you eat protein. If it doesn't, you go there to the gym and you have no energy. And that is how slowly the body is incapable of making energy from protein, and that's how people go in ketosis, and the energy goes down to zero, and finally like getting dizzy and collapsing.
I myself experienced that training for the 1991 Mr. Olympia. It was my first Olympia, and I wanted to try to look as good as possible, and I cut my carbohydrates down too low. And on 2 occasions I passed out just from not having enough carbohydrates just to power my legs. You know, my body just shut down. And I was off for 5 or 6 seconds both times. And through experience, I know never to go that low again. So with carbohydrates, you want to experiment and gradually come down. And if you ever feel yourself getting to a point where you're dizzy, you break out into a very cold sweat, you're seeing blurred vision, then you know you're going too low. You know, then you're depriving the body of too many carbs. Up your carbohydrates a little bit and just stay safe.